The War in Heaven. The terrible wars between the Old Ones and the Necrontyr that followed, known later in Eldari myth as the War in Heaven, would fill a library in their own right. But the Necrontyr could never win. Their superior technology was consistently outmaneuvered by the Old Ones thanks to their mastery of the webway portals and warp gates. The Necrontyr were pushed back until they were little more than an irritation to the Old Ones' dominance of the galaxy, a quiescent threat clinging to their irradiated world among the halo stars, exiled and forgotten. The Necrontyr's fury was cooled by their long millennia of imprisonment on their home world, slowly transforming into an utter hatred towards all other forms of intelligent life and an implacable determination to avenge themselves upon their seemingly invincible enemies. But in the face of defeat, the always fragile unity of the Necrontyr began to fracture once more. No longer did the prospect of a common enemy have any hold over the disparate dynasties. Scores of generations had now lived and died in the service of an unwinnable war, and many of them would have gladly sued for peace with the Old Ones if the ruling Triarch had permitted it. Thus began the second iteration of the Wars of Secession, more widespread and ruinous than any that had come before. So fractured had they become by then that had the Old Ones been so inclined, they could have wiped out their foes with ease. Faced with the total collapse of their rule, the Triarchs searched desperately for a means of restoring order. In this, their prayers were answered, though the price for their species would be incalculably high. It was during the reign of the Silent King Jarek that the godlike energy beings known as the Catan first blighted the Necrontyr. It is impossible to say for certain how they first made contact with the Catan, though many misleading, contradictory, and one-sided accounts of these events do exist. The dusty archives of the Tomb World of Solemnus claims it was but an accident, a chance discovery made by a stellar probe during the investigation of a dying star. The Book of Mournful Night, held under close guard in the Black Library's innermost sanctum, tells that the raw hatred that the Necrontyr held as a species for the Old Ones sang out across space, acting as a beacon that the Catan could not ignore. Another account claims that from the earliest days of their civilization, Necrontyr scientists had been deeply engaged in stellar studies to try to understand and protect themselves from their own sun's baleful energies. After long, bitter centuries of searching for some power to unleash upon the Old Ones, the Necrontyr researchers used stellar probes to discover unusual electrodynamic anomalies in the oldest dying stars of the galaxy. In the complex skeins of the energetic plasma of these suns, Necrontyr found a sentience that was more ancient than that of any of the corporeal species in creation, including the Old Ones, entities of pure energy that had spawned during the birth of the stars eons before. These entities had little conception of what the rest of the universe entailed when the Necrontyr first found them, feeding upon the solar flares and magnetic storms of these bloated red giants. Here was the weapon the Necrontyr had long sought to bring about the downfall of the Old Ones. Beings they believed were the progeny of the death god they worshipped. Howsoever first contact occurred, the shadow of the Catan fell over the oldest Necrontyr dynasties first. The power of these star-born creatures was incredible. The raw energy of the stars made animate, and the Necrontyr called them the Catan, or star gods in their own tongue. They were dispersed across areas larger than whole planets, their consciousnesses too vast for humanoids to comprehend. How the Necrontyr ever managed to communicate with them is unknown to the Adeptus Mechanicus. Understanding that such diffuse minds could never perceive the material universe without manifesting themselves in a material form, some Necrontyr actively sought the Catan's favor and oversaw the forging of physical shells for the Catan to occupy, cast from the living metal called necrodermis that they had once used for their colony torch ships. Fragmentary Eldari legends tell of translucent streamers of electromagnetic force shifting across space as the star vampires coiled into their new bodies in the physical realm across an incorporeal bridge of starlight. Thus clad, the Catan took the physical shapes of the Necrontyr's half-forgotten gods, hiding their own true desires beneath cloaks of obsequious subservience. So it was that one of the Catan came before the Silent King, Jarek, acting as forerunner to the coming of his brothers. Amongst its own kind, this one was known as the Deceiver, for it was willfully treacherous. Yet the Silent King knew not the Catan's true nature, and instead granted the creature an audience. The Deceiver spoke of a war, fought long before the birth of the Necrontyr, between the Catan and the Old Ones. It was a war, he said, that the Catan had lost. In the aftermath, and fearing the vengeance of the Old Ones, he and his brothers had hidden themselves away, hoping one day to find allies with whom they could finally bring the Old Ones to account. In return for this aid, the Deceiver assured he and his brothers would deliver everything that the Necrontyr craved. Unity could be theirs once again, and the immortality that they had sought for so long would finally be within their grasp. No price would there be for these great gifts, the Deceiver insisted, for they were but boons to be bestowed upon valued allies. Thus did the Deceiver speak, and who can say how much of his tale was truth? It is doubtful whether even the Deceiver knew, for trickery had become so much a part of its existence that even the Catan could no longer divine its root. Yet his words held sway over Jarek, who, like his ancestors before him, despaired of the divisions that were tearing his people apart. For long solar months, he debated the matter with the other two pharaohs of the Triarch and the nobles of his royal court. Through it all, the only dissenting voice was that of Orica, the court astrologer, who foretold that the alliance between the Necrontyr and the Catan would bring about a renaissance of glory, but destroy forever the soul of the Necrontyr people. Yet desire and ambition swiftly overrode caution, and Orikan's prophecy was dismissed. One Necrontyr year after the Deceiver had presented his proposition, the Triarch agreed to the alliance, and so forever doomed their species. For their part, the Necrontyrs soon fell into awe of their discoveries, and the Catan moved to take control over their benefactors. The powers of the Catan manifested in the physical world were indeed almost godlike, and it was not long before the Catan were being worshipped as the star gods the Necrontyr had named them. Perhaps they had been tainted by the material universe they had become a part of, or perhaps this had always been their nature even when they were bound to the suns they fed upon. But the Catan proved to be as cruel and capricious as the stars from which they had been born. They soon reveled in the religious worship of the Necrontyr and feasted upon the electromagnetic life energies of countless mortal slaves.